Well, howdy. It's time again. It's that time again. Hey, Moon. Yeah, tonight we're starting book number 3, What Stalks the Deep, from the Sworn Soldier series from Team Kingfisher. I have secured the book, and finally got the fucking gusto to start reading it tonight. We're gonna get through a good bit of this. This book is not super long. I read the first, just 2 chapters or so just to see what we're looking at here, but yeah, it was about time I got this one done. I have the second book ready to upload on my YouTube. Please check me out, NoReignn Reads on YouTube. I've got, if you've missed any of it, I've got all of the first book in this series, which was What Moves the... Oh god! I got all of What Moves the Dead. And I am working on uploading What Feasts at Night. And this will be the last one in the series. This will be the last one in the series, the trilogy for the Sworn Soldier, following our hero Alex Easton through their paranormal adventures throughout the world. And this one actually takes place in America. They come over to see the good doctor from the first book, who assisted them in House Usher and its paranormal findings. So we've come stateside. So, without much further ado, a little bit of ado, little tiny bit of ado, we begin. Chapter 1. So this was America. Fresh off the war with Spain, which was all that anybody was talking about. Guam. Everyone on the ship had been full of opinions about Guam. Several people asked for my opinion, as a military man, quote unquote. They were wrong about the man part, but the thought of explaining Galatia's sworn soldiers to a boatload of Americans was so exhausting that I needed a gin and tonic just to contemplate it, and a second one to decide that explaining would be a bad idea. As for Guam, my opinion was that it was probably a fine place and the weather was undoubtedly better than that in Galatia. I developed the habit of smiling down into my gin and tonic and saying that I'd never been to Guam and so wouldn't presume to know more than the people on the ground there. This had the advantage of being true and also generally made at least one other person in the conversation look like an absolute tit. And if I passed our days on seas having gin and tonics and no opinions about Guam, that meant I was definitely not worrying about the telegram I had been sent by my American friend, Dr. James Denton. Begging you to come with all haste. Need your help, stop. Bring Angus, stop. If it had been anyone other than Denton, I would have sent another telegram to the effect of, what the devil is the problem, stop. But Denton and I had faced down the horrors together 2 years prior, and I knew that he had a cool head and was, if anything, far more skeptical than I was. If he needed my help, then I would damn well come and help him. Also, he included 2 tickets to Boston. Also, my sister was having another child, and while I think babies are fine in the abstract, my sister has a regrettable belief that if I just hold one long enough, I'll come to enjoy it. I will not. I've proven this to my own satisfaction, but apparently not to hers. And America seemed like an excellent alternative. Land of opportunity, they say. Which presumably includes the opportunity not to hold a baby. I say all this very flippantly, but I'll be honest, I didn't much care for the telegram. Not that I objected to Denton asking for my help, far from it. There are some experiences that bond people together more closely than blood, and the nightmare we'd faced happened to be one of them. If he needed my help, I'd come. No, what bothered me was the idea that whatever trouble Denton was in, it was the sort of trouble that required Angus and me to come across the ocean. As if given the entire North American continent to draw from, Denton needed the 2 people he knew with experience in nightmares. I tried not to dwell on it, and instead lost myself in listening to people be wrong about Guam. It almost worked. Our ship steamed into Boston on a brisk October morning. The sun was shining, the water was relatively calm for the season, and the air smelled only slightly of brine and dead fish. Our crossing had been uneventful, our docking equally so. The jaws of the wharf closed over our ship and held it fast. The streets of Boston looked like the streets of any other port town I've encountered. It could have been London or Hamburg. Make half the people darker and half the walls lighter and you could be in Barcelona or Istanbul. Skin and stone changes, but not much else does. There are always children pelting around and harried-looking men moving cargo into wagons and a few extremely worried men who do not have cargo and don't know why, and a dozen horses looking bored and one horse looking like it's about to go on a rampage and a couple of lost passengers huddled together like a clutch of baby chicks. Inevitably, a vendor is trying to sell something to one or more of these groups, except possibly the horses. The familiarity was oddly comforting. In general, I rather like Americans, but they're so terribly earnest. But I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a bit nervous. One American can really fill a room. I assume it only takes 100 or so to really fill a country. A man threaded his way through the mess. Oops, excuse me. A man threaded his way through the mess, avoiding the vendor, and approached us. He was a fine-boned and neatly dressed like a small bird wearing a clean, unassuming suit. My hand and then Angus's. Oh, excuse me. You must be Lieutenant Easton, excuse me. You must be Lieutenant Easton, he said, shaking first my hand and then Angus's. I'm Kent, Dr. Denton's assistant. I'm to see you to the hotel where you'll be meeting him and Mr. Ingold. Lead on then, I said, trading a look with Angus. We don't shake hands in Galatia, but Americans are so completely mad for it that can't refuse, or they get this confused, somewhat hurt look. I resigned myself to shaking a great many hands in the next few weeks. Kent secured a cab. Angus and I hefted our luggage onto the roof. Is that all? Said Kent. No more trunks? No equipment? We travel light, I said, wondering what sort of equipment he expected me to bring. Angus had the rifle case. Did that count as equipment? Or did he think that all Europeans were like the upper-class Brits and had 5 different outfits for each meal of the day? Come to think of it, maybe Americans did think that too. If so, thank God I'd brought one of my many dress uniforms. You can always get away with wearing a dress uniform instead of a formal wear. Although Denton had never struck me as a formal wear type. Someone who would help you finish off a fungal abomination that had taken over your childhood friend, yes. Someone who wore a tuxedo with tails to dinner, not so much. Our cab left the docks, trotting past rows of horse-drawn streetcars. We don't have those in Galatia. Then again, we don't have that much flat ground in Galatia. It's a very small country made of very large mountains. We grow turnips and sheep, but our primary export is people who want to get the hell away from it. I was farther away now than I'd ever been. I don't suppose you'd care to tell me what this is all about, I asked Kent. Kent folded his hands neatly on his knee. I am certain that Dr. Denton will explain everything when you arrive. So much for that. Angus might have been able to get more out of him if they'd been alone and doing the... Oh yeah? Well, my boss once made me carry Con 10 miles in the snow because Kyle was too cheap to hire a horse. Dance. But it didn't look like we'd have time. We eventually reached a medium-sized hotel. Kent paid the driver and helped Angus pull down the luggage, and we followed him inside. That is a lot of mauve. Mauve? Mauve, I said after a moment of stunned silence. The wallpaper was mauve. Mauve, however you say that. The carpet was stretched across the marble floor was mauve. The draperies were mauve. The upholstery was mauve. The pillows scattered on the furniture were mauve with gold tassels. I suddenly knew how a bee must feel when its head buried in a mallow flower. Kent waved to the front desk, and a man came out from behind it, wearing a mauve tie. He shook our hands and said that it was the hotel's great pleasure to serve us. He clapped his hands and summoned a bellhop, dressed from head to toe in mauve, who took our luggage. I wondered if the bellhops ever stood up against the windows of the floor for camouflage. The hotel man shook our hands again and pressed our keys into them at the same time, a skilled maneuver that I assumed required years of experience. Dr. Denton is waiting for you in the dining room, said Kent, herding us efficiently to one side of the lobby. We entered the dining room, which had mauve tablecloths, and I spotted my old friend Denton, who, thank Christ, was wearing a dark brown suit and no mauve at all. He rose to his feet and shook our hands. Easton, Angus, I'm so glad you agreed to come. From the tone of your telegram, I expected you to be in hip-deep in live wasps, I said. Not dining in such a, colorful establishment. We'll get to the wasps in a moment, said Denton. May I introduce you to my friend, Dr. John Ingold. John, this is Lieutenant Alex Easton, and Angus, forgive me, it occurs to me that I don't actually know your full name. No one does, said Angus gruffly. I hid a smile. Angus has been with me since I was a scrawny 14-year-old with a shaved head and bound breasts who barely knew which end to hold a gun by. In all that time, I'd never learned if Angus was his first or last name or where he came from originally. If he ever wants me to know, I imagine he'll tell me. Pleasure to meet you both, said John Ingold, reaching out across the table to shake our hands. He had the tan skin and straight black hair that I associate with the native people of this continent, and when he opened his mouth, his Boston accent was so thick you could stand a spoon up in it. Yes, we know about Boston accents in Galatia. We're backward, but we do occasionally meet people. Okay, fine, I met a Bostonian in Paris once. Now, small break here, to be clear, I'm not doing a Boston accent. I can't do it. It's foreign to me. I'm Southern. it's not from my mouth. Oh, mauve. Is it mauve? Shade of dusty pink. Oh, I was imagining it to be a yellow. I'm thinking of chartreuse. That changes my entire narrative. What? Okay. That just changed my head image of the whole place. I was thinking like a almost bumblebee yellow type of deal, but I think that's chartreuse, like the yellowish green. Lesson learned. Back to our story. The waiter approached. I half expected him to go in for a handshake as well, but he merely asked for our orders, then retreated into the mauve distance. So, I said, putting my elbows on the table and looking at Denton, what has you so concerned? Denton rubbed his face. It's a mess, he said. Dark doings, Ingold added. The way he pronounces dark as dark was so pure that I had an involuntary urge to snatch up the teapot and find a harbor to dump it in. My cousin Oscar's gone missing, said Denton. We grew up together and we were in very regular correspondence up until his letter stopped 3 weeks ago. I sent an additional 2 letters and then went to West Virginia myself to try and find him. I settled back against the exceedingly mauve cushions. I'm sorry to hear it, but you must know, Denton, that I'm no kind of detective. No, of course not. Denton shook his head. I know exactly where he vanished. He was investigating an abandoned coal mine outside of Shaversville. That's what I need you to help me with. I've never been in a coal mine in my life, I protested. I have, said Angus, in Limburg. It was dark as the pit and we had to walk bent over. We all waited politely for him to say anything more, but this seemed to have exhausted Angus's store of coal mine information. Denton coughed. At any rate, it's your experience with unusual circumstance that I need. I raised an eyebrow. Angus raised both of his. You mean like what we saw at Usher's Lake? I said flatly. Because I'll tell you, that was the first time I've dealt with anything like that. Sadly, it was not the last, but what had happened a year ago in Galatia was not something I wanted to dwell on. The first time for me too, said Denton. He looked suddenly weary and much older than I remembered. But you did deal with it, and you know there are terrible things in the earth. If you encounter another one, you won't waste time insisting that there must be a different explanation, or that I'm lying to you, or that none of this can possibly be happening. Terrible things in the earth, yes. Denton and I had seen a terrible thing in the earth and ended it with the help of Angus and a brilliant English woman who knew everything worth knowing about mushrooms. The only reason that I slept at night was because we had destroyed it. I did not want there to be another one. Another fungus? I asked sharply. Denton drank down his whiskey and signaled for another one. Ingold watched me, his arms folded, and I wondered how much Denton had told him about what we saw in that tarn. Not a fungus, Denton said, when the waiter had left again. At least, I don't think so. But more lights in the deep. Lessons chapter 1. Now, I'm not going to take some time to discuss every single chapter, but this set the mood. West Virginia, Appalachian horde. We're in the fucking mountains. We're in a coal mine in the West Virginia mountains. Jesus Christmas. I'm gonna be fucking terrified before this book's done. I just know it in my bones. You knew it was about the mines. Is this one about the Wendy's? Maybe. That's my gut instinct, but a little bit. You're gonna see in chapter 2, because I've read chapter 2, and that's about as far as I got. I think we are gonna have something different than that. We'll see. Honestly, I'm curious about where this goes. I'm not 100% sure. Where it's gonna be. But chapter 2. About 2 months ago, my cousin Oscar went to Hollow Elk Mine in West Virginia, Denton said, looking to see if there was any coal left. I sipped my gin and tonic and waited. His mention of lights in the deep had taken me back forcibly to Usher's Lake, to the brilliant, terrible stars that glowed in the depths of the tarn. It was not a memory I cherished. Everything here runs on coal, Ingold explained. During the war between the states, the South ran their warships on coal from the Carolinas. The North ramped up production in West Virginia to compensate and never stopped. Now you'll hardly find a hillside that somebody's not sinking a mine into. But this one was abandoned, I asked. Ingold nodded. Hollow Elk Mine is a bit east of Shaversville, dug in the 1700s. Old place, but the ground was bad. Rock falls, cave-ins, the lot. Miners said it was unlucky. Some of them said it was haunted, put in Denton. Any unlucky mine is haunted, said Ingold dismissively. You kill enough men with bad food and bad air, the earth soaks that up. What my mother's people would call bad medicine. I doubt Hollow Elk is worse than any other in that regard. No, there was more at work here. Miners reported strange lights in the deep, not just the usual knocking and tapping one gets in a working mine. It was abandoned about 40 years later. The owners couldn't get enough people to work it, and by the end they were losing money on it. It reopened briefly during the war, but closed right up again. Who are the owners now? Said Angus. You're looking at him, said Denton. He leaned back with a sigh. Oscar, God love him, always liked digging, whether it was papers or actual dirt. He was going through our family's old papers when he found the deed to the mine. I hadn't even known I'd inherited it. No one's given it any thoughts for at least a generation, I imagine. Hollow Elk had been abandoned and hadn't been worth much even when fully up and running, according to the papers. Oscar was curious as to why it had been abandoned. Denton took a gulp of whiskey. If I didn't know better, I'd think his eyes were getting misty, which is surprising, because Denton was not the misty-eyed type. When Oscar and I were kids, he was always looking for caves. Got stuck in one when he was 12, and it took the fire department 3 hours to get him out again. Then he was back in there the next week. So when he asked if I'd mind if he took a look at the old mine, I didn't think twice. He said he wanted to see if there was any money to be made from it, and with more modern mining techniques, but I knew he just wanted to go poking around in underground. Caves, mines, that sort of thing, he was mad for them. Denton looked up at me, a wry, unhappy twist to his lips. So you see, this is ultimately my fault. I raised a skeptical eyebrow at that. Did he have experience underground? Angus asked, other than getting stuck? Quite a lot, yes. Angus and I exchanged a look. Then I don't see how you could be blamed, unless there's a lot more to the story, I said. The line between Denton's eyes didn't smooth out. He sent me a number of letters, he said. The first few aren't particularly noteworthy. He reached the mine, set up camp there, and began mapping out all the details. Then, almost a month after he'd arrived, he sent me this. Denton nodded to Kent, who extracted a sheaf of notes from his valise, new one, and handed them to me. I unfolded the letter. It was written in a neat, even hand, the sort of lettering beloved of clerks and teachers. And just so we understand, this is the next little while is going to be his note and his letter to our Dr. Denton. Bear with me 1 second. I actually have to take a quick second. My dog's barking outside, so I'm just going to go grab her really quickly. Forgive. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Oh, what up, Toxic? We're just getting into it. You're right on top of story time. Story thus far. If you remember from the first 2 books, our hero Alex Easton has met the good doctor again from his first book, and we're stateside. We're in Boston right now. He needs some help because his cousin went into a mine, and the mine. I guess we're about to see what happens from here. Currently, we're going to start reading it's a letter that was sent to Dr. Denton from his cousin who was in the mines in West Virginia. James, I must apologize for what I'm about to commit to paper, for it seems as if I'm springing it upon you without warning. In truth, I've been observing these phenomena since the very beginning of my exploration of Hollow Elk, which I have been reluctant to mention them. They were easily dismissed at first, as the trick a man's mind plays on him in the dark, and I did dismiss them as such until the evidence began to weigh too heavily against it. Ah, I thought, the sort of person who talks about observing phenomena. I actually quite like people like that, because if you get them talking about their particular specialty, they'll tell you the most fascinating anecdotes about botflies or ball lightning or things they've extracted from some unfortunate soul's rectum. They can be immense fun at otherwise stuffy parties. I've been hearing sounds in the mine. Not the creaks or knocks that are common to mines, but peculiar sounds as of something moving around within it. The mine entrance is large, and the boards did not cover it completely, so I was not surprised by this either, suspecting only that some animal had taken up residence within. But of late, the sounds have gotten closer, and there is something damnably odd about them. They are wet sounds, almost a squelching. Roger hears them too, so I have at least that much proof that it's not my imagination. Furthermore, things have been going missing. Sheets of paper and at least 2 fountain pens have vanished, as well as several tins of stew. Roger denies taking any of it, and certainly he is not a man to steal paper and pen. Indeed, I should be overjoyed to find a newfound tendency of literacy in him, and would happily gift him entire reams. I do suspect him in the case of the stew. He's lately acquired an enormous mutt from the nearby town, and I have no doubt that it eats like a horse. I do not begrudge the dog, the stew, though. It is a comfort to have a watchdog about. Ordinarily, I would not trouble you with such minor matters, as the noises have continued off and on for weeks, and maybe nothing more disconcerting than a drip behind a wall, or a frog having taken up residence in some flooded subsection, of course. Things go missing everywhere, most particularly pins. But yesterday, when I was mapping the lowest area on the 3rd level, the last area excavated before the mine was abandoned, I saw something impossible in the depths. I saw light. I cannot explain to you how unsettling it was. When you are deep underground, light can only mean other people. There is no possibility of a shaft from above intersecting with this one. This level was not ventilated before being abandoned. Furthermore, the light was red. Deep red, like a darkroom light. I turned off my own carbide headlamp to refill it, and at first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but there was indeed a red light much further down the tunnel. It did not flicker like firelight, but was strong and steady. I'm not one of those men who carries a pistol wherever he goes, certainly not within a cave system. But I tell you, James, I wish that I had one then. There was something desperately frightening about seeing a light underground where no light should be. I thought of a dozen improbable explanations, mostly involving lava. You laugh at that, and I would too, but I could think of nothing that could realistically explain such a light. Very likely I should have gone to fetch Roger to explore the tunnel with me, but at the time all I could think was that if I did not go at once, whoever made the light could follow me up the sloping shaft to the higher levels, lie in wait there, and then come down behind me the next time I ventured in. I could not bear the thought, and so I redonned my carbide lamp and went forward toward the light. I will spare you suspense. I did not find the source. It went out almost as soon as my own light went on. The main tunnel here splits into 3 passages, and I picked the wrong one initially, only to reach a dead end. The central tunnel ends in a squeeze, and I would have had to crawl on my hands and knees in order to continue. I'm nearly certain, however, that the red light was on the far side of the squeeze. When I turned my own light off again and waited, I heard something moving down there. It dislodged dirt and pebbles, whatever it was, and I do not think that it was a sound of further subsidence. I would think that it was an animal, but animals do not wear lights. At any rate, James, you doubtless think that I have gone off my head from the bad air now, and I cannot say that I blame you. Certainly Roger is skeptical, although he is too loyal to say anything of the sort. And the dog he's acquired has given no indication of anything any strangers about. The brute even barks at passing deer and rabbits, so I doubt any human could pass unmarked. Nevertheless, I plan to get to the bottom of this. The squeeze is a small one, as blasting on this level was not far advanced, and while the air is hardly pleasant, it It's not so bad to make one hallucinate. No, I think some person has taken up residence in the mine itself. I plan to investigate further. Possible to do so without the ceiling falling in on me. Rest assured that I will take all due precautions and shall update you as soon as I can. Your devoted cousin, Oscar. I handed the last page to Angus, feeling an odd clenching in my gut. Not so much of the contents. I could think of half a dozen explanations off the top of my head, including very ordinary human thieves. But the word squeeze came and squatted inside my chest in a way that I didn't like. What is this squeeze he was referring to? I asked. Ah, said Ingold. In a mine like Hollow Elk, they leave pillars of rock between excavations to hold up the ceiling. If the weight of the ceiling is too great, it bears down on the pillars and the floor rises toward the ceiling, so the passage becomes very narrow. That is horrifying and I want to go home, I said, although I pronounced it, ah, I see. I fucking love that line. Despite the formal tone of the letter, it was far too easy to put myself in Oscar's shoes. I can imagine the weight of all that rock overhead pressing down, squeezing. I've never thought of myself as claustrophobic. It hadn't occurred to me that maybe I just had never been required to test that. The waiter appeared at my elbow with another gin and tonic before I noticed that my glass was empty. Funny how that works sometimes. Denton thanked him absent-mindedly, his eyes distant. I suspected that in his head he was a great many miles away, underground, watching strange lights. The next letter was dated 2 days later, and the handwriting was notably less even. Occasional blobs of ink. Then, I found the strangest thing in the mine, or more accurately, behind the mine. It's all so peculiar that I'm dashing off this note at once, lest I start to doubt my own recollections. Undoubtedly, you will doubt them as well. If you come here, though, and I wish that you would, I will show you what I'm referring to. I'm sorry. I'm telling it all out of order. I went through the squeeze and found, as I half suspected, that mining had stopped on the far side. The coal seam had run out, and these tunnels were mostly exploratory to see if they could pick up again elsewhere. But it was not a dead end, as I had believed. There was a gap in the stone amid the rubble left over, though it seemed so narrow that only a boy could fit through. I would have missed it entirely, but there was air coming through from the gap. My first thought was that there was another mine nearby and that the shaft had broken into this one. But there was no nearby mines, so far as I know, and unless their shaft ran for miles underground, I would certainly be aware of it. The other possibility was that this was somehow a natural cave, defied geology. Coal seams and caves do not coexist easily, particularly in this part of the world. Nevertheless, I will spare you suspense and tell you that it was a cave. How natural it is, I am not certain. Roger had grave concerns about excavating the rubble, afraid that the ceiling would come down upon our heads. Given the squeeze, I cannot blame him. We put up timbers, which I confess most likely provided only psychological support, and began clearing the rubble. The tunnel we found is low and broad, requiring one to traverse on hands and knees, sloping downward. The walls are very smooth, but a curious, almost undulating shape, tapering inward for perhaps 2 feet, before belling out again for another 2, then back again. Despite the discomfort of crawling, it was a very easy passage, though it went on for a remarkably long distance, moving downward into a gentle spiral. I could not determine if we were directly beneath Hollow Elk Mine or if the spiral veered to one side or the other. When it finally ended, it was a tangle of limestone seamed with cracks. By this I knew that we had gone down extremely far indeed. It looked like a natural cave system, though many of the stalactites had fallen and broken, probably in recent times, judging by the wear. But far more important was a passage leading upward to the right, from which light was emerging. Not the red light that I had seen before, but a steady white glow. Then it was a marvel. Oops. Sorry, pages got stuck together. A chamber 100 feet across, floored with some gemstone that I had never seen before. It was perfectly smooth, almost like glass, and shone like a mother of pearl, and it glowed in the darkness with a light strong enough to read by. I've never seen anything like it. It was beautiful and impossible, and it filled me with awe and dread that only the inexplicable can invoke. I do not know how such a thing came to be. The gemstone was too hard to break off, and Roger certainly tried his best. He did not like the cave, though, pronouncing it as not canny. You must come and see it, for I can hardly believe my own eyes and would be grateful for someone else's. Roger has many fine qualities, but objectivity is not among them. That is the bulk of my discovery and the most important thing. I will note in passing that on our return I found the tins that had gone missing. They were in the small cave, each of them punctured in the middle and drained, so our mysterious thief is staying down here, although we did not see him during our visit. Please come at once. This is an extraordinary find, and one which deserves to be brought before the eyes of men of learning. Yours, Oscar. Huh, I said when I had reached the end and handed the last page to Angus. A gemstone cavern underground? Almost sounds too fabulous to be true. You're not the only one to think so, Ingold muttered. Obviously, I went down at once, Denton said. He was nowhere to be found. I spent a day or two trying to find him, but no one had any leads at all. When I came back, this was waiting for me. He shoved a much-folded slip of paper across the table. I unfolded it and saw another telegram. My apologies for having missed you. Stop. I took ill from the mind gas. Please ignore my prior letters, as I was not in my right mind when writing. Stop. Hollow Elk Mine is of no interest. Stop. Wordy fellow, your cousin, I said, passing the telegram to Angus. I would have used half as many words and paid a great deal less. Then again, perhaps this Oscar fellow was too wealthy to care. Wordy, yes, said Denton, in letters as you saw. But he writes telegrams the same as the rest of us. Or he did. You don't think he wrote this one? I hazarded. I'm nearly sure of it. For one thing, he hasn't responded to any of the letters I've sent after, and he hasn't sent any more of his own. Maybe he's embarrassed, rumbled Angus. You go off your head on mind gas, you see things that aren't there and send wild letters about it? A man has a right to feel like a damn fool. Maybe, said Denton. I'd have said that Oscar is more the type to make a joke out of it, but even so, he would never have said that the mine was of no interest. And even if that was true, he simply would have gone home. But his mother says that he hasn't been back, and he hasn't written to her either. Trust me, Oscar could be off his head from mind gas, half dead, and missing both hands, and he would still have written home to his mother. I half smiled at that, but it turned into a frown. I suppose that leaves the possibility that someone murdered him and sent the telegram to cover it up. That's what I think happened, offered Ingold. I grant that the letters about what he was finding were unsettling, but there's no reason to think that it was anything but straightforward murder. He had an assistant. If there was something valuable in the mine and his assistant wanted it, he may have killed Oscar to get it. There was a tightness around Denton's eyes, but he didn't protest the suggestion that his cousin was dead. I wondered if he had accepted the possibility, or if he and Ingold had simply argued it so many times that it no longer held the power to sting. Roger was incredibly loyal to Oscar, Denton said. And yes, I know men have turned their coats before, but Roger was very nearly illiterate. He couldn't have sent that telegram. He got someone else to write it then, argued Ingold. By the well-worn feel of the debate, I was pretty sure this wasn't the first time. And that's why you've had no more letters. He knew he couldn't fake those. Denton sighed. Would you think less of me if I said that that's what I hoped happened? But the letters, in the mine, he rubbed his hands over his face. There's something very wrong with that mine. I made the trek to West Virginia myself and found his gear and paper still there, but not Oscar. I only went a little way into the mine, just far enough to call for him, but it felt wrong. He met my eyes across the table. Felt like standing in Usher's house again. And you of all people, Easton, know that I don't say that lightly. Usher's house. The creeping malignancy that had seemed to infest the walls there made more than just the library full of rotting books and the worms gnawing on the beams. The thing that had dwelt in the dark lake and sent fungal fingers into the house itself. Yes, I knew. The thought of facing such a thing again made me want to turn around and head straight for the docks for a ship and go back to Europe. In fact, if there wasn't a ship, I might see how far I could swim. But Denton had asked for my help, and there was nothing in me that would allow me to turn tail when a friend needed me. Ours is not to question why, etc. I hate that poem, but I understand. Denton had stood beside me against the horrors in Usher's Lake. It was my turn to stand beside him now. I drained my gin and tonic and set it down. All right, I said. When do we leave? That's chapter 2. Quick water break. BRB. All right, and we begin chapter 3. We spent the night in the hotel and caught the train the next morning. Before leaving, Denton tapped on my door and slipped inside, looking awkward. I wanted to have a chat with you, if I may. Certainly, I said. I'd made an attempt at folding my clothes back into my trunk, which Angus was in the process of correcting. What's on your mind? Denton rubbed the back of his neck. I wondered what made him so ill at ease. Other than his cousin vanishing in an abandoned mine full of squeezes. You know that we don't have sworn soldiers here, he said. I don't know how you want to handle that. I'll do whatever you like, of course. Oh, is that all? I'd already anticipated the issue. What Americans knew of Galatian sworn soldiers derives from the most lurid sort of periodical, where I would likely feature a 6-foot Amazon with a harem of cowed males. I wouldn't mind being taller, but having a harem of either sex, frankly, sounds exhausting. Given the choice between explaining the reality to half the people I met or simply letting them assume that I was a man, no, there was no question. I wasn't thrilled about it, but frankly, I had been tired of explaining matters a decade ago. And by now, I had approached a kind of transcendent exhaustion. And what was my other option? Wear skirts and let men open doors for me? No, thank you. At least when people mistook me for a man, they didn't do anything more obnoxious than demand my opinion of Guam. To say nothing of the possible dangers if someone decided that I was a woman and thus a potential victim. I did not want to compound the awkwardness of foreign travel by having to shoot someone in the kneecap. It's fine, Denton, I said. We just won't bother correcting anyone. Not your fault that your language is so woefully short on pronouns. You don't even have one for talking to God. It's an oversight, he admitted. All right then, I'll make sure Ingold knows. For a language with so many words in it, it's got some definite flaws, Angus said once Denton had left. I don't know that we get to judge, I said. Galatian is possibly the most complicated language in Europe. Among its many quirks are different pronouns for men, women, children, soldiers, priests, rocks, and God. The one for rocks, Shah and Shan, didn't come up much, but thinking of Hollow Elk Mine, I had a grim feeling that I might have a use for them sooner rather than later. The train ride from Boston to West Virginia was extremely long by the standards of Europe, but it was also remarkably comfortable. Denton apologized to us several times for the conditions when we had stepped aboard, which was baffling until he explained that about Pullman cars and the luxurious accommodations available on some railways, which apparently included 5-star restaurants, barbershops, and some all manner of absurdities. Is the toilet a board with a hole in it? I asked, breathing into this monologue after about 5 minutes. Denton blinked at me. God, no. Then it's spectacular. Wake me when we get there. I settled back in the extremely well-padded seat, pulled my hat down over my eyes, and fell asleep up to the sound of Ingold snickering. The journey took much longer than one nap, as it turned out. I knew intellectually that America was larger than Europe, but when we changed trains and Ingold showed me on a map where Boston was, where the Hollow Elk Mine was, and then exactly how far on the route we had come, I nearly swallowed my teeth. We could have crossed Galatia 3 times over in that time, and he hadn't even moved an inch on the map. Christ's blood. No wonder Americans all move like they've got extra space around them. If their country was a house, it'd be one of those monstrous old ramblers that no one can afford to heat in the winter. They probably developed drafts in New York just because someone had left a window open in San Francisco. Our fellow passengers were all exuberantly friendly by Galatian standards. There was a great deal of handshaking, naturally. I only had one bad moment on one of the platforms when we changed trains when my tinnitus acted up and the roar of the engine was drowned out by high ringing. A man rushing to meet his train jostled me from behind and I spun around, suddenly disoriented, expecting the enemy. My expression must have been alarming, because the man froze like a rabbit. Despite being larger than me, good God, that was terrible cadence. My expression must have been alarming, because the man froze like a rabbit despite being larger than me. What he thought of the short, stocky fellow about to go for his throat, I couldn't guess. Steady, said Angus. He must have said it 2 or 3 times before the tinnitus faded and reality rushed back, trailing embarrassment in its wake. Sorry, I muttered to the man, turning away. All right, said Denton, as we caught up with them. I shrugged. At a moment, I said a bit gruffly. Fine now. Denton nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Soldier's heart, they call it here. I'd gotten off lightly, all things considered, but there had been those under my command who hadn't been so lucky. When we finally entered West Virginia the next day, I thought we must almost be there, until Denton gently explained that the state was almost as large as the entire country of Ireland. So it's a big state? I asked hopefully. Not really, no. I sank down into the seat and watched the not very big state go by. The landscape was spectacular. The hills covered in ranks of trees and blazed the colors of madness, all red and gold and an astonishing shade of pink. And you'd hit a valley, and suddenly everything would be stripped away. The trees toppled, the earth scarred with tracks and great scaffolds of machinery, billows of smoke rising from the pumps that kept the miners from suffocating or drowning, both. And next would be a ramshackle little town of a sort that I'd seen before. The kind that is kept from being a slum by the sheer willpower of the people who live there. Then the train would move past, and the hills would close over the town, and we'd be surrounded by a blaze of trees again. So much coal, I muttered, as yet another mining town flashed by. You'd think they'd have enough of it by now. Ingold snorted. There's never enough. People aren't burning it, they're finding new uses for it. That hotel we met at where everything was purple? That's done with that's done with aniline dye made from coal tar. You know a lot about this, I said, impressed. I'm a chemist. Used to work for DuPont. Used to? Decided there were better things to do with my life than finding new ways to dye cloth a slightly different color and then having white men take the credit for it. I felt the pang of solidarity. I couldn't guess what the situation was like for someone with Ingold's ancestry, but I was certainly used to having men take credit for things. Even when you're a sworn soldier, there's always some jackass who thinks the contents of your pants mean that you can't possibly be commanding a unit. As individuals, they're easy enough to deal with if most of the unit knows you and has your back. If you get a pack of them, or God forbid, a superior officer, things get messy. What do you do now? I asked. I dabble in things. I raised an eyebrow and he laughed. I dabble in a great many things. I read too many papers and tinker with concoctions that mostly no one wants. He's being modest, said Denton. He's a genius. I'm a singularly unfocused genius. Ingold spread his hands in a self-deprecating manner. Occasionally, I manage to cook up something worth selling, mostly formulas for dyes. It keeps me out of trouble, more or less. Ah, I considered this. Well, knowing about coal as you do, what do we have to worry about in this mine other than the strange lights? Just the roof falling in? Actually, Oscar noted that the timbers were in remarkably good repair, all things considered. Ingold said. The real problem is likely fire damp. Also black damp, white damp, and stink damp. That seems like a great many damps. Oh yes. Fire damp is what they call methane. It seeps out of the coal and rises. It's extremely flammable and highly explosive. Ingold grinned. Best of all, it's completely odorless, so we'll have no idea if it's there until the shaft explodes. I edged away from him on the seat. Fortunately, there's several ventilation shafts, so we may be lucky on that front. And we're using the very best modern safety lamps, which cuts down on the risk of explosions. Then there's black damp, which is heavy. Fortunately, it doesn't explode. It simply smothers you. Fortunately, I said weakly. White damp is why miners use canaries and is probably the most dangerous of the lot. It's left in what's called the after damp, after blazing or an explosion. If you begin to feel lightheaded or dizzy, alert someone else immediately. His smile faded. It can cause hallucinations, and I still think that there's a better than even chance that it's behind this entire business. He glanced over at Denton. If it is, then I don't know if we'll be able to explore the mine safely. It's extremely more poisonous. And explosive. And what was that last one? Stink damp. Hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten egg. That one, at least, is pretty uncommon. Does it explode? Angus asked, sounding resigned. Of course it does, said Ingold, as if surprised that he even had to ask. I rubbed my temples and wondered if God still looked out for fools, and if so, whether I'd exceeded our patience already. They finally used a pronoun for God. Small side note, the Galatian pronoun for God is har. Capital H-A-R. Back to the story. Eventually, I grew tired of trees and cold towns, so I studied my companions instead of the landscape. There was something just slightly odd about the way they sat on the bench seat. Not touching. Ingold, at least, was so pointedly not touching Denton that the space between them was practically glowed. Which was interesting, and also none of my business. I went back to looking out the window again. The train chugged on, wheels endlessly repeating their wordless word. If you listen too long, you might imagine they're saying almost anything. Dark, dark, dark. Doom, doom, doom. I scowled, annoyed with myself, and made a conscious effort to map a different word into the sound. Any word, so long as it wasn't sinister. Which is why we pulled into the last station with the train wheels chanting squid, squid, squid. Because for some reason, that was the first word that came to mind. When we finally got off the train for good, Kent went to arrange our luggage to be transported, and the rest of us tromped to the livery stable to hire horses. Along the way, we saw the town of Shaversville, although most of the locals called it Burn Churches, which was a trifle unsettling, and apparently referred to an incident during their Civil War. The town consisted of a depot, a mill, and a couple of storehouses. A general store, a saloon that doubled as a hotel, a post office that doubled as a telegraph office, and a tangle of shacks that looked to be support for the aforementioned building. Also 2 churches, neither of which looked burned or even singed. The livery stable was attached to the hotel, from what I could see. They mostly catered to out-of-towners who came in to work on one of the various local mines. I can't speak to the quality of their accommodations, but I can tell you that quality horse flesh was not a primary concern. Angus gazed at the 5 nags presented to us and produced a silence more damning than most men's profanity. I patted my horse on the neck. She gazed past me with an air that reminded me of an elderly Galatian woman I used to know who had 12 children and 27 grandchildren, and thus no longer registered screaming, crying, wailing, gunshots, explosions, or the sounds of breaking crockery. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna mute for just a second. Right, sorry about that. Work was blowing me up. On the bright side, she didn't try to shake my hand, which was an improvement over the hostler who did. The horses were all equipped with what I am told was a Western saddle. Like everything else in America, it was much too large. The horns stuck up so determinedly in front that I couldn't escape the feeling that my saddle was sporting an inconvenient erection, and the moment I leaned forward to figure out good God, Jesus Christ. Like everything else in America, it was much too large. The horn stuck up so determinedly that in front that I couldn't escape the feeling that my saddle was sporting an inconvenient erection, and the minute I leaned down to figure out why the stirrups were so far forward, the horn jabbed me in the gut. Once we actually started moving, I spent about 20 minutes trying to figure out if the mare was simply ignoring me or if the saddle was really as thick as it felt. It was like riding a couch that was with an inconvenient spike in the middle. I tried to imagine what would happen if the mare jumped over something and had a brief, vivid image of ending my career impaled on a saddle horn in the wilds of West Virginia. Fortunately, I could not imagine this horse jumping without a mechanical assistance. "Are you doing all right?" Ingold called back. "I'm fine," I said through gritted teeth. I was former cavalry, for God's sake. I was not going to complain to a civilian. In fairness, I was light cavalry, which mostly meant that we had ridden our horses to the battlefield, then got off to fight, since troops are cheap and horses are expensive. Still, there were principles involved. I tried squeezing with my knees. Nothing happened. I shifted my weight. Nothing continued to happen. The mare plodded onward, uninterested in keeping pace with her herd mates. "You gotta use the reins," said Angus, coming up behind me. "Just the reins." "Like a barbarian?" I missed my horse, Hob, with sudden intensity. I could direct Hob with no more than a vague notion that I might like to go in that direction. But he was back in Paris, eating his head off, and I was sliding around like a sack of potatoes on the back of an animal that also rather resembled a walking potato. Still, it wasn't the mare's fault. I gazed at the reins, sighed, and resigned myself to barbarism. That's chapter 3. Chapter 4. Now, just so we know, I'm probably going to end at chapter 4, just so we have a couple of parts to this, because there's not too much. This book's not super long. So we'll end this on chapter 4, about an hour tonight, and then I'll be back on tomorrow night to continue. Chapter 4. I don't know what I expected from the entrance to a mine. A big dark hole in the ground, maybe. And indeed, there was a large hole in the side of a hill, but it looked more like the entrance of a train tunnel, assuming the train was about 50 feet wide. It went back about 50 yards, turning into gray twilight inside, with minecart tracks coming out, but it wasn't the first thing you noticed about the Hollow Elk mine. No, the first thing were all the buildings. There were buildings everywhere, from windowless shacks to a 3-story wooden structure directly in front of the mine and an immense brick chimney at the top of the hillside, the stones blackened with soot. The buildings were in various states of disrepair, ranging from dilapidated to kindling. The big one at the front of the mine looked like a couple of barns stacked on top of one another, with sharply angled roof lines and staircases in odd places. I assume there were chutes or something involved, but I haven't the least idea how coal is mined other than pickaxe, dynamite, apply one or the other. So don't ask me to explain it. We threaded our way past the buildings and stepped into the shadow of the mine entrance. It was a cool autumn day, and I was already wearing a coat, but a chill pricked my skin anyway. It felt like entering a cave, and while the sunlight felt bright and crisp behind us, the far-off wall of the entrance was smothered in shadows. There was a small building tucked just under the overhang of the tunnel, off to one side, which had been spared the worst of the weathering. It had 2 rooms and a large window empty of even the memory of glass, which made me suspect that it had been the foreman's office, judging by the bedroll, the desk, and the scattered papers. It was where Oscar had set up his base of operations. "There's only one bed," said Angus, frowning. "Angus, you dog," I said. "I'm flattered, but what will Miss Potter say?" He rolled his eyes at me. "I mean that there were 2 people staying here, weren't there?" "Oscar and Roger," Denton agreed. "I didn't think of that when I was here before, but you're right. Roger must have taken his gear and left Oscar's." "A point in favor of murder?" asked Ingold. I shrugged. If I were trying to cover up a murder, I'd take both sets of gear with me, so that it looked like my victim simply left. Denton grimaced. "We don't know that Roger left after the disappearance. They may have had a falling out beforehand. It's also possible that Oscar was simply lost in the mine and Roger waited for him until the supplies ran out, then left," Ingold said. Denton's face tightened, but he didn't reply. Angus had been poking around the crates and straightened at this. There's still some tins of food left, he said, holding up a can of peaches. He didn't go through them all. Perhaps Roger didn't like peaches? I offered. Angus gave me a look that indicated this was not a constructive addition to the conversation. Ingold rubbed his face. Sadly, I think we don't have enough information yet. We need to find this Roger fellow if he's still in the area. Track down who sent the telegram, if we can. And of course, he waved his hand in the direction of the mine shaft. I was not looking forward to that bit. Nevertheless, I followed everyone else out of the building and deeper into the hillside. The gloom increased the farther back we went. The shaft narrowed down to a line of carts, then angled sharply downward. A jumble of rusted equipment lay off to one side. The shaft had been braced up with timbers as far down as I could see, which wasn't very far at all. Very dark and very quiet. I suppose we should do this first, said Denton, without much enthusiasm. At least far enough to make sure that Oscar isn't, well. He flicked his fingers which somehow managed to convey lying dead at the bottom, without actually having to say it. Do we have lights? I asked. There wasn't much point in going down if we didn't, and I could just see someone tripping over a discarded pickaxe and breaking their neck. The miners' lamps were in their luggage with Kent. Said Ingold. But there's 2 lanterns back at the foreman's office. He and Angus went to fetch them. I stood looking down in the dark with Denton beside me. It was eerie. No, that understates the case. It was downright uncanny, in a way that had nothing to do with ghosts or monsters. You could feel the weight of the stone pressing down overhead. Unaccounted tons of it, held up by, a few wooden pillars? I spluttered what a ridiculous concept that was. As if you could flip a mountain over, hold it suspended by a couple of trees planted in the summit. Denton had said that what he felt reminded him of the Usher's house. I couldn't say that I felt anything like that. Mostly what I felt was an intense belief that humans were not meant to burrow into the earth like worms or moles. You didn't go all the way down before? I asked. He shook his head, the motion almost invisible in the gloom. I called for Oscar a few times, but I didn't dare go down on my own. If there was an unexpected drop-off, or if I slid and broke a leg, he trailed off. Thankfully, I imagined lying in the pitch darkness at the bottom of the shaft, leg broken, running out of water while the earth pressed down and down. I reminded myself firmly that I was not claustrophobic. Dark, I said unnecessarily. Very, Denton replied equally thoroughly. As we stood gazing down, air began to trickle past us with a soft whooshing sound. I took a step back, startled. Oh my goodness, hold on, get my screen back. I took a step back, startled, as the pressure increased. It was only a strong breeze, not difficult to stand against, but it was blowing from behind us down into the shaft. The devil? Sound rose in pitch to a dull whistle. The wind began to slacken and it died away. Changes in atmospheric pressure, said Denton. Cave systems breathe the same way. It'll calm down in a bit. Breathing was exactly what it felt like, as if the mine was inhaling, dragging air down a steep stone throat. A throat that had already swallowed one man alive. If I had been alone, I don't mind telling you that I would have turned around, ridden back to the train station, and gone right back across the ocean to Paris. There may well be mines in France, but no one expects me to visit them. I wasn't alone, though, and, like many fools over the ages, I was determined not to be the one who broke first. Even the name, Hollow Elk, was troubling. It sounded like an animal gutted and hollowed out, used to skin stretched over empty bones. I imagined an elk staggering down the hillside in the dark, hide hanging in tatters. In my mind, it moved like the hares in Usher's Lake. I shook my head to clear it. I never used to be this fanciful, or if I was, my fancies were mostly about wine, women, and occasionally, as a distant third, song. Not skinned deer with nothing inside them. Why Hollow Elk? I asked Denton. Where'd the name come from? Probably from Elk Hollow, he said. Though around here it'd be a holler, not a hollow. There's a town called Banner Elk, not far away, but presumably the name of the mine is taken on that. I like the idea of a banner elk much more. A big sturdy ungulate with flags streaming from its antlers, prancing down the middle of the street during a parade. Why couldn't Denton have inherited a mine like that instead? Light splashing on the walls around us announced the return of Angus and Ingold, holding lanterns. We shouldn't go too far down, Ingold said. There's a buildup of gas, we don't want to encounter it. We'll get loopy? I asked. Our lamps will cause it to explode. Oh, lovely. Despite this warning, Ingold set off down the shaft without apparent concern. The remaining three of us looked at one another, looked after him, and then followed him into the dark. The wood walls of the shaft were dark and uneven, and when I brushed against one, my sleeve came away black with coal dust. The air wasn't noticeably stale, but it wasn't exactly a fresh spring breeze either. Perhaps the mine's breathing wasn't enough to keep it circulating this far down. Mostly it smelled cold and lifeless, as if all the green and growing things above ground were very far away. The shaft down was steep, but not treacherous. I still wouldn't have wanted to fall down. We passed several abandoned mine carts and strategically placed wooden backstops, presumably to keep you from tripping and falling all the way to the bottom. I paid very close attention to my feet because if I looked up, I'd see how low the ceiling was and how puny the timbers were that held up so many thousand weights in stone. Here, said Denton, stopping. He held up a lantern and pointed. That's the first horizontal shaft. It looked like a black hole in the wall, framed by wooden pillars. We stepped into it one by one. The lantern light might have gone further if the walls hadn't been as black as well. The tunnel ran back a few dozen yards, then split into 3 branching tunnels. Then lifted the lantern higher, and we could just make out where the first tunnel split again. Bad enough the place is black as Satan's bowels, and there's a mountain on top of you, but it's a maze as well. Very good thing I'm not claustrophobic. So this damp of yours, I said to Ingold, looking around the shaft. Said we won't smell it. Would we be standing in it now? We most likely are, said Ingold, with what I thought was entirely too much enthusiasm, but not much of it. Wait here a moment. He walked forward, fingertips skimming the wall, and then paused. Does anyone have a lighter? I pulled mine out and handed it over. Ingold flicked and a spark flashed, and an eerie blue-white flame appeared on the wall itself, sliding and slithering over a section of stone. A moment later, it winked out again. That was fire damp. Denton pursed his lips, looking fondly resigned and rather angry. Would you have exploded that mine just now? Sure, but I didn't think it was at all likely. Ingold flashed a boyish grin. The mine's breathing too much. Any fire damp here will rise to the ventilation shafts. It's farther down that we'll really need to work. He handed my lighter back. I wouldn't use that anywhere in the mine, though, just in case. I shoved my hands into my pockets and told myself Ingold wouldn't have done that unless he was quite sure it was safe. Therefore, my desire to throttle him was entirely unwarranted. Is there a map of the tunnels? Asked Angus. Not as much, said Denton. There's an old excavation plan, but it wasn't kept up to date. Third shaft that Oscar wrote about and is listed as a future third shaft, for example. Angus made a grumbling noise that managed to indicate his displeasure with the previous ownership of the Hollow Elk mine. Denton turned back toward the main shaft. Not much point in exploring without headlamps. We'll have to make a map as we go along. I'll do the mapping, volunteered Ingold, as long as somebody else comes with me when I go. I don't mind telling you that I wouldn't want to be down here alone. There was an almost imperceptible shift in the air as all 4 of us relaxed a fraction. Someone had said it out loud. No, certainly not, said Denton. No one should go down the mine alone. Basic safety precautions. My relief at that pronouncement was almost enough to get me back on top of the shaft without the hair on my head standing on end. Almost. The mine's breath hissed out, going past us this time, and I was very glad to see the glow of a fire lit outside, and to hear Kent informing us that dinner was about to be served. Chapter 4. Now, all in all, this book is probably going to be about a 3-parter. Today was part 1, so we'll leave it at chapter 4. But the vibe is fucking stressing me out. It's the Vampire Mountain from Next to Me in the Wilderness. Yeah. Oh my god, I love that story. That's still, even after all this time reading all these different stories, nothing's come quite close to what I felt when I first read that book. But yeah, what a wonderful start to our story. We're in our setting. We've gotten just to the tip of the mine, and we've got kind of an idea of what we're going to be looking at going forward. This is going to be creepy as fuck, and I mean creepy as fuck. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see where the story goes. I will be back online tomorrow evening, likely around 9 or 10 Central Time. Got a bit of a hangout before that, so 9 or 10 Central Time I'll be back on here, and we'll get into part 2, starting with chapter 5, and get further into that mine, man. Get yourselves ready. It's gonna be, ooh. If you're claustrophobic, please prepare yourself, because it's gonna be my gut tells me shit's gonna get wicked here in a little bit. But thank you so much for coming tonight. Thanks for listening to my story. Good night. I love you.